Hello, and welcome to the first official episode of Church Launch Podcast. Thank you for joining me. Today we're talking with a good friend of mine named Frank Bealer. He has been, we go way back. We used to work together at Elevation Church for a better part of a decade, as we'll get into in the podcast here in a minute. But now he is, he's working for a church in the greater Atlanta area, as well as doing some really unique stuff, helping churches find a way to leverage their facilities for multiple uses, to not only provide for additional streams of income, but also to help with community outreach and help people feel more at home within the church building, and to draw people in from the community, which is a big part of what the church was created to do in the first place. And the idea of multi-use facilities and using your facility for multiple uses isn't new, but I think a lot of people in the past have gone about it the wrong way. And when I was at Elevation, we attempted some different multi-use strategies in an attempt to leverage the facility we already had and some of the production equipment we already had for community uses, and be able to offset some of the mortgage or whatnot with that income. And while I didn't have to worry about the dollars and cents of it, I did have to worry about the teams that were staffing it and the health of them. And that's one important thing to point out as you consider multi-use facilities and multi-use strategies, is that it's going to put pressure on your support teams and on your ministry teams if you're not careful. And that's one of the things that Frank's really trying to hone in on, and he's trying to just perfect, is how these multi-use strategies can be put into place without weighing so heavily on your central staff. So please take a few minutes, watch this episode. I think you'll find it really beneficial. It'll hopefully open your eyes to different ways of multi-use strategy. And leave some comments below. Check out the information below in the show notes. And as always, join us on the Discord. We'll have a little conversation going about it, and hopefully it'll be of value to everyone who listens today. So welcome back to Church Launch Podcast. Today we're talking with Frank Bealer. Frank has been a good friend of mine for about 15 years now. We worked together at Elevation Church. He was he wore a lot of hats there. Family pastor. I think he was campus pastor for a while, pastor of various different things. But good friend nonetheless, I guess first and foremost. Now he's wearing the hat of Chief Growth Officer and one of the founders of Phase Family Centers, as well as the Chief of Staff at local church in the Atlanta, Georgia area. And we interact a lot, just our paths crossing and the work we get to do together. And I know that this will be a good conversation that'll add a lot of value to a lot of churches out there. Frank, how are you doing today?
Man, I'm glad to be here. And I just realized hearing you say that I have chief in both of my titles. And so I don't know if that's a thing or an issue, but maybe you're the Chief Church Launch Podcaster.
There we go.
Maybe that would be your title. There you go. So a bunch of chiefs here. Just trying to help churches. So we'll do what we can. Man, thanks for having me on. Thanks for serving churches this way. Your willingness to just, make connections with people, help people grow, and church leaders to find out about new opportunities and what's out there in the marketplace, and what's out there as fresh ways to serve church launches is great. And so thanks for making it happen, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for taking the time to be with us. It means more than you know. And, especially as we're getting started and trying to launch this Church Launch Podcast, I'm full of puns, so it's going to be good. There's a lot of launching. Yeah. So,
I love it.
as we're talking about launching, I think one of the things, Chief of Staff, that's a kind of an evolution of probably a different role that more people might be familiar with within a church. Is that, what would you equate that to?
Sure.
At kind of a traditional...
So think executive pastor, associate pastor, if we go way back. But there's this unique angle in that my focus is on staff leadership, staff development, staff culture, kind of investing in that. Do I still have responsibilities with finances and things like that? Yes, I do. But at the end of the day, the executive leadership team reports to me at our church, and I get the opportunity to just invest in them, help them make better decisions. And I love it. I love that role that I get to play. I love being there on Sundays and working with volunteers, and kind of unique in that on most Sundays, I don't have a dedicated assignment on Sunday other than to be present. Sometimes that means I get to be a firefighter, but more often than not, I get a chance to build some relationships with some people, make some connections, and really try to help our staff navigate unique challenges that come up along the way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, firefighter. I think a lot of people. That's the one. Everyone's familiar with that one. Oh, he's the firefighter. Got it.
Oh, yeah. You got to have one of those.
So Phase Family Center. Most churches probably aren't familiar with it. I don't know how much it's really gotten spread out there yet. Certainly not as much as it should have. But tell us a little bit about that. Tell us what you're doing there.
Sure. So first of all, it's intentional. Like, we've been kind of cautious at moving forward with it and what that needs to look like. We want to make sure we grow at the right pace and be really intentional about it. So phase, simply put, is this idea of we want to help churches go further, faster. And the way we want to do that is help them be a better steward of their facilities and find new ways to engage their community. And so phase was started as this idea, we're going to build this big building, this big shiny building. I called you, Brian, to help with all the AV and figuring it all out. Man, I couldn't do it without you. Felt a little overwhelmed by all of it, to be honest. A lot of big projects, 62,000 square feet for this cutting edge new idea where we would basically say, let's be multi-use first. Let's serve our community first. And oh, by the way, a church meets here on the weekend. Along the way, while that was happening, we partnered with Mark Batterson up in D.C., where they ended up with a city block. He wrote about it in this book called Circle Maker. So Mark calls and says, hey, will you help us figure out preschool? There's a childcare crisis in our nation. So we came alongside. We run a preschool there in Alpharetta, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. We run a preschool, events, and co-working, and a church is a tenant in the space. But moving forward, what we figured out through all this is that churches need help figuring out how to navigate multi-use. Most churches' strategy is a really simple equation. They have a visionary idea to steward their facilities better, either current facilities or new buildings they're building. They hire a manager, somebody that's done it before, not owned a business, but ran a coffee shop or ran a preschool or ran a co-working operation, whatever it may be. And then they Google the rest. And hopefully they figure it out and run a business that is successful and successfully engages the community and generates some revenue for the church. What we want to do is replace Google. So Phase Partners made a pretty big shift during COVID to say we're going to do more of a franchising model so we can serve more churches. And so what that looks like now is you have a visionary idea, a church leader that's wanting to take it to the next level. They hire a manager that still reports to that church, but then they select Phase to be a franchise partner to help with all the systems, documentation, everything they need to be successful at running an events business or a preschool business in their space. By doing it that way, it generates more revenue for the church, and it helps the church know what they don't know and have an expert coming alongside of them to help them navigate the complexities of being multi-use.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack. I'm trying to think where to start. I mean, it seems like a very, I've been dabbling a lot in real estate investing and trying to get into some of the short-term rentals. And one of the things that I constantly come across is house hacking, which I've got 4 kids in my house. I'm not hacking my house. I'm not going to have anyone move into the spare bedroom, and just not opening that can of worms. And then land hacking, and it's like, okay, I got a couple extra acres. We could put some tiny houses out back, and rent them out and make some extra money. Great cash flow. This seems like church hacking. It's like you've got a building and you've got this space, so it's kind of finding a use for it that doesn't necessarily, like, I'm sure you have to make some concessions to your normal operations and the way you normally function. But it also just allows churches to use their existing facility or potentially build their new facility with this in mind to be able to help pay for itself. Is that right? Is that?
Exactly. So the idea is, how do we connect with our community differently? How do we bring people in throughout the week in a different way other than church programming? And how are we just a better steward of our space? And so this isn't a new idea. It's just the way we do it that makes it unique and different. Where I saw a need is that so many churches are doing it independently. They're opening up a preschool and trying to figure out how to do it. They're trying to rent their space out for events and trying to figure out how to do it. And so maybe they generate $5,000 a month in revenue in their event space, and they do a wedding or a corporate event or whatever. But if you run it like a business here in Alpharetta, it generates $72,000 a month in our event rental space alone. And so it's like,
Wow.
oh, whoa, that's a huge number, but that requires commissioned salespeople, an events business, and going to trade shows and treating it like a business unit. Well, this is where it's interesting. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the church kind of went through the stage of like, we're doing too much. We need to simplify and focus on Sunday. And I fully agree with that. Change needed to happen. The church was doing all this programming and they were just focused on everything. And so therefore not focused on anything. Well, now we're in a different season where it's like, okay, we've scaled back to all Sunday. And we recognize there's a stewardship issue, but we don't want to get back to where we were doing way too much. How do we split the difference? Well, people are saying, we'll dabble in it. We'll try some multi-use. We'll do it a little bit. Well, the problem is, if you dabble in it, but you don't become an expert in it, it never quite becomes what you hope it would be. So there needs to be a little bit more strategy and support there in my thinking. And so the goal is for Phase to make it less of a distraction. How do you do multi-use without it becoming the primary focus of the executive leadership team? And here's what I found. Most churches, their executive leadership team could very successfully run a preschool or run an events business if that's all they were doing. But the reality is they're going to get that started and go back to running the church that they're called to run. And so because of that, there needs to be a support system and structure. So think, if you've ever read the book or seen the book E-Myth or E-Myth Revisited, it's this whole idea of systems and processes and structure. In the church, when they've done multi-use, they've been too dependent on Google to provide all those resources. And what Phase is saying, hey, let us come alongside of you. Let us help you figure out hiring and licensing requirements and what you should purchase and how to manage recalls in your preschool toys, all that stuff. You got to think through everything. Let us help you manage all that and figure that out. Keep being the church. And oh, by the way, generate some revenue and be a little bit better steward of your facilities.
Okay. So I'm hearing you say, I mean, it makes sense. A lot of, like myself included, if I want to do something, I'm very much a DIY type person. I'm going to Google it. I'm going to YouTube it. I'm going to try to figure out how to get away with probably as little investment as possible to accomplish my goal. And there's obviously exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, it's like, okay, this is kind of a side hustle. Let's figure out how to do this down and dirty. So in my mind, the church going out on their own, trying to create their own preschool scenario, like you said, it's taking up bandwidth that's valuable to keep the church running and allow that to be the main focus. But it's got to give a little bit. I mean, there's got to be some bandwidth allocated to it. How much bandwidth do you think or would you speculate it would take? And I guess more than speculate, like you have data to back this up, but how much bandwidth does it take for a church executive or one of these family ministry pastors, whoever it may be, to step in and bring you on? And then ongoing, what kind of staffing does it require for a church to launch something like this in their own facility?
Yeah, great question. That's big question. The idea would be for the executive leadership team. Okay, so the idea would be for the executive leadership team for one person to be dedicated to help with business operations. It already happens in most churches anyway. Somebody handles the finances and the business operations, and that's kind of a point person. The church is going to staff and hire the preschool teachers and all that. What we're going to do is come alongside and provide the pro forma and work alongside of you to figure out, when do you ramp up? When is it profitable? When should you pay overtime versus hiring another teacher? For the events business, you start with a project manager and maybe an event salesperson, and then you kind of scale it based on a certain need and contracts that you sign. We're going to help figure all that out. But the key is your manager Okay, the church is going to generate most of the revenue. It's going to go to the church. That's the important part of this for me. It's not going to investors, not going somewhere else. It's going to the church. And so it's not just rent. You can bring in somebody to be a tenant and pay just rent, but that mitigates the upside. They can actually make more if they're the operator, if the church is the operator. That's what we want to come alongside and help figure out and generate more revenue for the church. Now, is there a little bit of work for the church for that? Yes, is the answer. I think you're going to have the typical executive leader on the church is going to spend 5 to 7 hours a week with these operations as they're getting ramped up and going. Once you get through design process and we're ready to roll this out, it's going to be 5 to 7 hours a week for a good little while. The manager, this is the important part, of the events business and or preschool, their first phone call, if they have a problem, is to phase, not to their executive leadership team. So if they need to hire more teachers and they run an ad on Indeed and they're not getting a response, their call isn't, hey, let's have an executive leadership team meeting to figure out our better ad placement on Indeed. And now we've all got to become experts on, well, maybe we should use Monster, or have you tried LinkedIn? And now suddenly it's taking tons of energy, effort, and time. We're saying, no, call us. We're spending tens of thousands of dollars a quarter on ads to hire teachers across our locations. We can help you figure this out. Don't call your executive leadership team. So is there some decisions that need to be made once we get this thing rolling at the executive leadership level? Yeah, it's a franchise-owned business that the church benefits from, but we want to minimize that to where the day-to-day questions and needs are in systems, trainings, documentation. If you lose your manager and you got to hire a new one, who's going to train that person and bring that person in? We're going to say Phase is going to do that, not the church. And that's where the church, I've seen with preschool, has gotten sideways in the past. Preschool has started with a great director at that location. They don't have any partnership, but they have a great leader that loves the church, loves kids, loves the community. They're awesome. And eventually they move or retire. The replacement of that person, the onboarding, now involves executive leadership. And now it's who draws the short straw to now help manage this preschool for all eternity. And that suddenly there's this huge gap. And Phase is saying, call us, we'll help with that. That's our partnership. And so that's where we want to come alongside and mitigate a lot of that burden. Not all of it, but a lot of the burden for the leadership team.
All right. So a church calls you, or they get a hold of Phase, they decide this is the approach they want to take. Let's say, for the sake of conversation, this is a church. They've been probably in a portable facility. Most churches start out in a high school gym or some sort of public area. Trying to think, program centers, that sort of thing, community centers. There's the word. And they decided, hey, we want to build a building. And they're like, okay, well, how do we pay for it? And they're like, all right, well, this is a great approach that can help us, kind of pay that loan, pay that mortgage quicker, pay it down quicker, what have you. Is there, what does that process look like for them? If they're, tell us, walk us through it.
So, it's not particularly hard. Here's the thing. You figure out your initial programming. What does the church need? What size auditorium do we think we need? Based on we know the growth of the church and where we're at. And what size kid space? Give me big boxes. We need some common area space. We need kid space, maybe student ministry space, depending on how they do that. And then adult space. All right, what are the big boxes? How many seats do we want in the auditorium in general for the church's benefit? And then one of the things that gets skipped so much in church space when it comes to multi-use, the next natural step is to do a site and market analysis. Forget the church for a second. We've got a piece of land. We're looking at a piece of land. We need to evaluate and say, should we put an events business here or a preschool business? It's not enough to build a building and say, we now have a preschool. Does the community need one? What's the price points? Let's do it like we would if we were expanding our business. So take our church hat off for a second. If we were adding a location, we have our first restaurant, now we want to have a second restaurant. We're not just going to go, oh, there's some land for sale. We're going to take that land. That's going to be great. The people are going to love that restaurant location. There's some business work to be done. So what we do is we work with an outside firm that specializes in premium preschool placement. to help find out. They work with all the big boys across the nation, the big names that you know. They help figure out site analysis. And so what they're going to do is if the church has a piece of land that's been gifted to them or they've got their eyes on a piece of land, let's do a site and market analysis and go, can we stand up a successful preschool here? What does it look like? What are our opportunities and our threats to doing that? Knowing that the credibility of the church and the attendance of the church will help get the word out. But let's assume that none of that's true. We're literally just starting a business, an events business, preschool business. How do we analyze that area to see if this is a good location? Because what we don't want to do is have in the back of our mind that we're going to open a preschool. It's going to help pay for things, but nobody's going to enroll in that preschool based on location or whatever it is or the need. And so now you've created a huge challenge for yourself. So let's not use anecdotal information to make such a big decision. So you do a site and market analysis. Once you get back the results and we wrestle with those, then we say, in light of the need in the community, we think there would be an incredible opportunity for a 150-kid preschool here in the community. What does that look like? Well, now what we do is we work with the architect and we start to go, what would we need to change in our kid space? Toilets, sinks, countertop space, ventilation, points of egress, fire code, things like that, that'll make us licensing compliant for a preschool. And we go, okay, what's the additional lift other than just building this building? There's going to be additional cost because you're going to have a few more bathrooms, things like that, to opening up a preschool. And then while you're building that out, you're building a pro forma based on that site and market analysis with compensation rates in the area, with the tuition rates in the area to go, okay, what does a business model look like with this space? And then you reconcile the two together. Take donations out of it for a second. Let's let them be a blessing, but let's take our building and go, what would we build for the church's benefit? How could we modify this to make it great for serving our community in a different way and potentially be a good steward of the space? What our goal would be, like back of the napkin math, not a rule, but a good rule of thumb, is to go, can we build a preschool that at about 50% occupancy, it breaks even? If so, that bar feels really low. Got a 150 kid, 200 kid preschool. Can we get 75 or 100 kids in the area to enroll in that? The answer is probably yes. That's pretty low hanging fruit. Now the question is, what most churches do if they do it by themselves, they get to about 70% occupancy and then stop. They don't do any marketing. They hope some word of mouth happens. Or they get to 100% occupancy because they've underpriced and it's just all breaking even. They just happen to be at 100% occupancy. There's probably a sweet middle ground where it can generate a little revenue to help mitigate expenses for the church, while at the same time serving the community really well. And so there's a business side to this. There's a huge ministry side. Don't get me wrong. Can you imagine if all tithes and offerings went to do ministry in the community, pay for staff and serving the community rather than paying for a building? That's awesome. Don't worry about the building, being paid for it in another way. That's awesome. We can do that. But there's a business element to it to make sure that that's not just a good idea or anecdotal, but there's data to support it.
So it's not an afterthought. It's not like, hey, we have this land, we're starting to build a building. Let's try to add this in there. It's, hey, let's approach this entire project with this goal in mind, if it works. And there's probably a lot of markets where it doesn't, or at least, some of the rural markets where, or perhaps even the older communities, you get into these snowbird cities and that sort of thing, and there's just not necessarily kids there to occupy your space. You mentioned the architect. I'm curious, do you guys have architects that you kind of bring into this sort of project, or do you just work with whoever the church has in mind already?
Yeah, so we love to work with the church's architect because usually along the way, they already have a vision and a strategy. What we bring to the table is we understand licensing. We understand how to read it really well. So oftentimes an architect, they design the space to international building code from a fire code standpoint. And if you say, hey, we want to put a preschool in here, they don't necessarily always put in an optimized, best ratio, best laid out preschool. They make sure it's in fire code compliance. But that may not be right from a programming or business model that actually is most successful. So what phase does is we then come alongside of you and help you move your rooms around, get creative to go, how would we lay out these spaces a little different? When is it 35 square feet per child, unencumbered space versus encumbered space? When do you have to have 2 sinks in the room? They're 6 feet apart, one for diaper changing and one for food prep, and like all those nuanced things along the way. We love to give that information to the architects and help dream up, how do we do this and stay in line with the vision? We're working with the church that they're really passionate about their large group space for their kids ministry, that doing a cool chapel vibe that they're actually going to use during the week for other stuff. So it's not part of childcare or couldn't be part of a preschool operation, but really cool space. But we needed to think through the other boxes, the other rooms to try to optimize and lay out the preschool. Well, that comes up with some really creative ways that walls are done in bathrooms to be a good steward. I've found that most architects do not have an expertise there. They can build a preschool based on plans and lay it out based on what fits on land, or they can build a church, but a church with an optimized licensed preschool is difficult. But when we give them the criteria and give them the coaching of why they might want to move these rooms or change these doors or modify this hallway, they can run with it, make those modifications at minimal additional cost to the church. And so for us to bring in a separate architect, now basically you have one architect reviewing another architect's plans. That only ends in somebody being disappointed and frustrated and creates tension.
Okay.
So we'd rather come alongside and do a little coaching.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah. You put too many chiefs in one room, and you get a war, I guess.
Tell me about it. Too many
Yeah.
chiefs. I'm already 2 chiefs myself, and so I've got all kinds of issues.
Yes. Clearly,
I
Frank.
see what you did.
Uh-huh.
I see what you did.
Let's touch on you mentioned connecting with the community, and I think that's a piece of this that I don't want to miss. It's more than just the financial aspect. It's more than just helping pay the bills. It's helping promote the church. It's helping bring people into the church and helping people know about the church and feel comfortable in the church. I think that's a big piece too. What's been your experience with that, and how that phase has kind of helped open the doors to the community in these churches?
Man, I'm so glad you asked that question because it feels like most of my meetings end up being on the financial side. And that's a big part of the decision-making process, right? When churches call me, more often than not, they have a heart for their community, but they're just trying to figure out how to be a good steward of the space that's just sitting there empty or will potentially be sitting there empty. But there is this whole other side. One of the things that I found to be a tension in our first model here in Alpharetta, we run the preschool and there's a church that's a tenant in the space, but there's no integration. So we have to fight for ways for there to be integration. Suddenly, by the church running the preschool, oftentimes a separate LLC wholly owned by the church. That's a whole nother thing. We can talk about accounting if we want to. But there's a liability separation there, but there's not a relational separation. So what this does is when we put on camps in the summer or whatever through the preschool, suddenly the church knows when that happens, and on Thursday afternoons, they're handing out popsicles to all the kids on their way out and connecting with those kids and finding ways to engage. One of the cool things is there's an incredible opportunity to engage and serve the teachers in the preschool. Many will be unchurched or not in church for a while. Sometimes, depending on your community, if they're an assistant teacher, they may actually have a lower income, making $12, $13 an hour. And there's an opportunity to serve that family, meet their needs, connect with their family. So now you're hiring a whole nother group. I mean, if you have a 150 kid preschool, I mean, that's another 20, 25 staff members, maybe 30. And so depending on what classrooms you have and whatnot, now you've mitigated all those costs, but there's this great opportunity to pastor those people and their circles of influence to do community-oriented events like in your parking lot and whatnot, concert in the parking lot or whatever, inviting all those preschool families. When you market preschool, it allows you to have a different conversation with your city, with your county, with municipal organizations, with the YMCA. Suddenly, you're not just a church with a church agenda. You're really just trying to meet a need in the community, and you're received differently. You're received differently when you try to enter into strategic partnerships with other organizations to meet needs, when the preschool sometimes leads the way. And so it just opens some different doors along the way. And then I know we talk a lot about the preschool, but the event side, can you imagine if we position your church in such a way that some of their most memorable and critical moments of a person's life are housed in the church? This isn't common anymore. Weddings oftentimes aren't in churches anymore. Funerals aren't in churches anymore. It's this unique thing where the church used to have this beautiful auditorium and space, and it was the space to gather large groups of people. Now that's changed over the last many decades. So now we have an opportunity to come full circle. Literally in my auditorium that's 50 feet from me right now, we have quinceañeras and weddings and bar mitzvahs and weddings, Protestant weddings and Indian weddings and corporate events. And along the way, our production team gets to meet with them. We get to connect with them. They get to find our church and find out that there's a church that meets here. I love the language of we're here to serve the community and connect with the community, meet a need for the community. And oh, by the way, there's a church here as well. But along the way, you meet some really great people. And there's these relational connections that happen that we are fighting so hard to get people to go find them and get them to come to church. And now they're coming through our doors on a regular basis. So the church, uniquely positioned to serve those people well when they come through the doors, is awesome.
Wow. That's awesome. And it's not just a byproduct. I think it's by design, yeah?
100%. Yeah. In fact, our tagline at Phase is gather with friends, shape the future. And our idea is whether you're in preschool space or event space, you're gathering with people, hopefully friends or coworkers. You're gathering with friends, and every gathering, whether it be in the preschool space or event space, is shaping the future, whether it be through education or through an event or a pivotal moment with a wedding or whatever it may be. There's this incredible opportunity we have to be a part of those moments. I literally saw on Twitter yesterday, on my son's Twitter account, one of the coaches that's been talking to him about playing AAU for him or whatever, had posted a photo that was his wedding at Phase. Suddenly, there was a connection and a conversation between my son and that coach that didn't exist before. Take the church out for a second. Just, we now know that same space. We now can speak to that together. And so Isaac messaged him and said, hey, was that picture taken at Phase? Oh, cool. My dad's there. You know, this is cool. What a small world. And suddenly this little opportunity for a conversation is there that wasn't there before. Can you imagine doing that over and over and over again for your church in the community on a weekly basis? I mean, literally thousands of people per month coming through your doors that wouldn't normally come through your doors, that now when they get invited to your church, like, I've been there before. Oh yeah, I know where that's at. Oh, that auditorium's so nice. Or gosh, I met some people there. They were so nice. They were so friendly. You know, that kind of culture gets built, and now you're more known in the community. And I think that facilitates relationships and ultimately gets a chance for us to share the gospel.
Yeah. And I think that's, should be the goal of every church, is to figure out how to draw people in the community into their buildings and be able to share the gospel. And this is, I mean, it's as much a ministry as it is another source of income. And
it is. And I will say, Brian, I don't want to miss that. Here's the challenge. There's this tension in multi-use that it's either ministry or a source of income. The emphasis on or. And the reality is, if we can run a professional events business, a professional preschool business, it can be both. It can generate revenue, it can have great impact on the community, and be ministry. It's not shady, it's not off. In fact, if you listen to, in the next presidential election, any candidate that's running, okay, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter politics aside, doesn't matter Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter, independent, doesn't matter. All on their platform talk about childcare. And they talk about a need to increase quality and decrease cost. The church is one of the most uniquely positioned to keep costs comparable to what the marketplace has, but raise quality. And that's a great place to start. Suddenly our posture, the way we serve families, the way we go above and beyond, the way we're going to be generous when there's somebody struggling or in need, or we hear about a family that's hurting, we're going to be able to go above and beyond. We can keep costs the same, great place to start, but increase quality. I think churches oftentimes try to decrease cost a little bit and do a good job with quality. And the problem is you have a young generation of families that are saying, no, 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 I want to raise the bar for my preschooler. I want you to do more for my kid, not just take care of them and make sure they don't break a leg today. Like, invest in them, make them better. And the church is uniquely positioned to meet the need in the community that's going to be said over and over and over again during the next presidential election, which is unique because 10, 15 years ago, when everybody was talking about healthcare, the church couldn't really speak up a lot. We agreed that we need to fix healthcare in our nation. It's expensive. But the church wasn't going to open hospitals in our sanctuaries. We try to do what we can, but like our hands are tied on meeting that huge national need. So we get stuck. We can do it internationally easier than we can do it in the U.S. But when it comes to preschool, suddenly we're actually very uniquely positioned to be at the forefront of meeting a huge need in our nation with the space, the way it's designed, and the way our posture is that we serve families. And so obviously, as you can tell, I get excited about the opportunity, not just from a business standpoint, not just from a ministry standpoint, but just overall, it makes sense. I've never been in an elders meeting where I've shared the vision of Phase and an elder look at me and go, I don't get it. I don't understand why we're doing this. This doesn't make any sense. As soon as I start talking, they start nodding their heads and are grateful for help. Brian, the reason we haven't made a big deal out of Phase so far is one of our other founders, Reggie Joyner, and I, so far since we shifted to franchising, I've done 2 Instagram posts. He's done 1, and we have just over 140 churches currently in the funnel working with us because the need is there. People need help, and we won't work with all of them, and someone won't be a fit, and we'll figure all that out. But the need and the desire to figure this out, to launch churches better, is there, and we're just trying to come alongside and be helpful.
That's awesome. Well, Frank, how can people learn more? How can they find you on social media? How can they find Phase Family? Where are you at?
Yep. So if you go to phase, phase.center /partners, that will take you to what church partnership looks like. If you go to phase.center, you'll see our preschools and see how we operate. But /partners will get you there to find out a little bit more about how things are going with franchising and what that could look like for your church, which is super cool. I'm Frank Bealer on all F Bealer or whatever on platforms, social media, whatever. I'll be your friend. I'll like your posts. I don't know. I'm not great at social media, but I go on there to see what other people are doing and pretty much just to post about my kids.
Yep, I hear that. And I'll put it down below too in the section down there. I think there's a thing down there somewhere where they can find a link, and we'll figure all that out. But thank you so much for taking the time. We'll definitely have to have you on again in the future to talk more about local church and some of the exciting things that you're taking on there. I know you guys are doing building projects and launching initiatives left and right, so it'd be cool to kind of get some perspective on that too. But as always, I appreciate your support and your time and everything you bring to helping churches all over the country just do what they do better.
Thanks, Brian. Man, I am so thankful for your friendship, first and foremost. We said that at the top of the call, but that matters most. And I'm one of your biggest fans. Cheer you on no matter what. I believe that your posture, the way you want to serve churches and the way you approach it is a breath of fresh air, and it's needed more in the church space. And so thank you. Thank you for the way you serve.
Awesome. Thanks, Frank. We'll see you again soon.